Hey Sharif, I can see some improvements in my upper body, sometimes upper abs starting to show, depending on how generous the light is. However, my love handles and the fat around my belly doesn't seem to go down. I mean, the fat has slightly improved, but that area doesn't improve at the same pace as the rest of my body. My question is, I've always had love handles and a belly since I'm about 14 probably, thanks to my lively Italian diet. Does that mean genetically I won't be able to get rid of it? It's my weakest point and it's the most difficult bit to improve. Any comments on that? What a fantastic question, thought process, level of awareness, and honestly, this video is going to stand the test of time when you have the thought process of, can you spot reduced body fat? So let's dive straight in, as this question I get at least, I would say 5 times per week. So first and foremost, I've got some good news for you, and I've got some maybe not so good news for you. Let's start with the not so good news. The not so good news is that there is very limited, aka weak evidence that we can spot reduced body fat. And what I mean by spot reduced body fat is saying, hey, I want to lose body fat here, but not there. Basically picking and choosing where our body utilizes fat for fuel. Now, I'm not going to go out there on a limb like other online coaches and say that there is no evidence, because if you actually look at the research, more and more research is coming out that it could be a possibility. I'm going to take you through the protocol at the end, which could give you a 1 to 2% advantage. However, we can't really pick and choose where we burn body fat from, no matter what we do with training, nutrition, or lifestyle management. So that is potentially the bad news. Even if we could, probably it's going to give you a 1 to 2% advantage if you set things up correctly. Fat loss is a global process, not a local process, meaning that your body will typically pick and choose the areas in which it will choose to liberate fat from first. And there's nothing much you can do about the stubborn body fat in terms of burning fat from there compared to other places. Now, the good news is that one area which you're focusing on can absolutely be reduced in terms of body fat. You can lose body fat on your belly, on your thighs, on your back, on your love handles, whatever it may be, as long as you stick in that calorie deficit for long enough so that the body has no choice but to utilize that fat for fuel. So that's where most people get a misunderstanding and mess up and be like, well, genetically, am I always going to have a belly? I can't basically burn body fat from there. No, absolutely not. But you are probably going to need more patience than you currently have right now. Because the main thing that I want to say is that before we get into the science of this, it's a very easy way to strip away all the enjoyment, all the fun, all the pride in which you can have about the process if you're just focusing on the things in which genetically are going to happen slower for you and you might not be able to change as fast. You know, sometimes I have a client who's lost 5 kilos, 10 kilos, who's been with me a while. They've doubled their flat dumbbell bench press. They're in different clothes, they're getting compliments. There's so many wins, and yet they're focusing on the one area of their body which body fat is still hanging on to, and they're just really worried about that stubborn body fat. If we never stop to smell the roses when it comes to your own accomplishments, and we just are completely zoned in and outcome focused rather than process focused, then essentially it's going to be a pretty poor show. You're going to strip all the enjoyment off the journey, because essentially what you're saying is, I will only be happy when. It's the delayed happiness effect, and that's not great. I'll only be happy when that body fat from there continues to come down, or I can see my abs. Do you know what I mean? So really focus on the process, focus on who you're becoming, focus on the wins you are getting, and watch what happens when you develop the relentless consistency needed to burn body fat everywhere, because you stayed in the calorie deficit long enough. Now, just know that the calorie deficit that took you from your first 5 to 10 kilos of body fat down is not potentially going to be the same calorie deficit which takes you to the next 5 to 10 kilos, because essentially you're a smaller human, and smaller humans burn less calories at rest. They have a lower BMR, a lower metabolic rate, and therefore you have to adjust for that. Typically, males will hold body fat around the midsection, the abs, the obliques, and the love handles. And typically when it comes to females, female fat storage patterning will be more around the hips, glutes, the kind of lower body, in particular hamstrings, thighs, etc. This is not right or wrong, good or bad. If you stick in that calorie deficit for long enough, you will burn fat everywhere. You just can't really pick and choose where that is from. Back in the day, we had Body Transformation Studio in London, and I think they're worldwide now. They would prey on the insecurities of people who had certain body fat in certain areas, and rather than just give them the advice that I'm saying, it's like basically be consistent. You can't really pick and choose. Stay in a calorie deficit long enough, weight train hard, sleep and stress management, all the boring stuff, and essentially you'll get to where you want to get to eventually. What they would do is be like, oh no, because you store fat kind of here around your triceps, triceps. That means that we need to reduce your estrogen levels. What they would be doing is trying to convince you that the way in which your body stores body fat was due to certain hormonal patterns. But not only that, if you want to fix that and reverse that, these are the supplements you now got to take. And obviously they were their own branded supplements and will cost a lot of money. I'm talking thousands of pounds. This is an absolute racket, and it just preys on the insecurities of people who are struggling with body fat in a certain area which they now want to lose. But there is no supplement plan, there is no nutrition plan, there's no training plan, there's no lifestyle plan in which you can follow, and it will just pinpoint the areas in which you want to lose body fat from and conveniently leave all the rest. It does not work like that. Fat loss is a global process, not a local process. Anyone trying to sell you on the fact that they could substantially allow you to burn body fat from a specific area compared to others are trying to sell you something, and I'll get out of there pretty damn fast. Now, I started off this video by saying that there is weak evidence. We should at the very least have a conversation about that, because in 2023, researchers basically took two groups of men and they wanted to test out this process. And before we get into what they did and the surprising outcomes of it, we have to understand how body fat is actually burnt. And it's a two-process part. The first is the mobilization. So body fat has to be mobilized for fuel. And just because it's mobilized doesn't mean it's going to be burnt for fuel. It then needs to be burnt for fuel. So we mobilize, then we burn it. Now, in the past, whenever we've done studies on this before, researchers have basically seen that, yes, you can mobilize body fat in certain areas, say around the midsection by doing more crunches, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to get burnt off for fuel. And they haven't really seen anything notable, hence me saying that there's nothing really you can do to influence or change that. However, this study found something very, very different. It got the two groups, and one of them did a 45-minute treadmill session at the end of their workouts, but the other group did the same amount of cardio. They did 2 ab exercises, I believe it was before the treadmill session, and then they compared how much fat they lost, etc. Now, both groups lost the same amount of body fat. However, the group that did the crunches and then the treadmill lost 2.5% more body fat from the trunk area compared to the study, which basically just lost fat kind of overall, which is fascinating because we haven't had this research before. Now, am I convinced that by doing a few crunches at the end of the workout and then doing your cardio, you're going to drastically see body fat melt from your trunk area, your belly? No, I'm not. And I've been a coach for my entire life, and I just haven't seen this play out in the real world. However, for me, it's like, if it could work, and if there's the barrier to entry, which is really low. So it's like, are you going to probably do some cardio or some more cardiovascular stuff as you get into a calorie deficit? Yeah, probably. And are you going to train your abs when you're in a calorie deficit? So we may as well do it in a way which could give you a 1 to 2% extra edge and maybe allow you to burn and mobilize body fat in that area more so than if you weren't doing that. You don't have to tip your whole lifestyle upside down in order to potentially get a 1 to 2% margin. However, the real truth and the crux of it is that no, we cannot really pick and choose where you lose body fat from. I'll link the study below if you wanted to look at it. However, there is some weak evidence that if you were to mobilize the body fat from where you wanted to lose it from first and then do your cardio, then that particular fat is likely to be more burnt off for fuel compared to if that area wasn't mobilized. If you want to do some hanging leg raises, some weighted crunches before your cardio, hey, you might be getting a 1 to 2% extra difference, and it's probably worth doing in that case. Do not focus on the one area which is being stubborn for you. Focus on the consistency, focus on the adherence, focus on the compliance, and focus on who you're becoming and all the other amazing outcomes which you're getting with the process. And I guarantee you that over time, that stubborn belly fat will indeed come off. And this is not going to get me many likes, but it's true. Oftentimes, it's not a client's body fat which is stubborn, it is their habits. And ultimately, just realize that yes, there's a big genetic proponent. Yes, we can talk about hormones and sleep and stress. But for me, it's all about controlling the things which you can control. Why worry about something you have no control over? The reality is there's lead and lag measures. The lag measure is you telling me or you asking yourself, right, I want to lose body fat here. I want to get into this clothes size. I want to be this confidence level. I want to be amount of strength and what have you. There's going to be a lag time between you saying you want that to happen and that for it to come to fruition. However, the lead metrics are the very things in which you have to do to get there. All right, cool. I've got to get my steps in, got to do my cardio, got to do my weight training, got to get my meals in, hit my macros. And indeed, I've got to get to bed on time and manage my stress appropriately. Focus on these things rather than the lag. And I guarantee you, the results you want will come to you. But if you're constantly looking in the bathroom mirror, grabbing that bit of belly fat and you're worrying about that, you strip all the fun from the process and you're missing the forest for the trees and not allowing yourself to stop and smell the roses. Are going to make yourself pretty miserable. So I will link the study below. Essentially, we need consistency in a calorie deficit for a long period of time, and all the body fat in which you want to lose will eventually go. You just don't really have a say over what happens first, and that's okay. Make peace with it. Hopefully this was helpful, team, and I will talk to you in the next one.